Hello everyone and welcome back to the Project Management PrepCast, and I'm certain that we are meeting your expectations as you are preparing for your PMP exam. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. Have you ever been in a meeting and then sent out a message from your phone that read, "Help, I'm stuck in this meeting," and they ran out of donuts? Well, I hope that you never have to do this, and I also hope that anyone attending your meetings never feels that such a cynical message is necessary when you are leading. But what exactly does make a good meeting? What are the meeting management techniques that we project managers have to know and master? Let's find out together with Elizabeth Harrin, who's joining us from London. Hi, Elizabeth. Good morning.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on the podcast today.
Good afternoon, actually, for you. It's good morning for me here in California, but for you, good afternoon. Yes. Let me start out our interview today with a question that is slightly different than how I start normally here. Please tell us about the worst meeting that you have ever attended.
Well, that's an interesting question. I went to a seminar recently, which was pretty bad. And the reason I thought it was a bad meeting was that the audio-visual equipment didn't work. The video kept stopping, and the video was supposed to be introducing the topics and providing background information to the people who didn't know much about what the meeting was supposed to be covering. So that meant that transitions between topics were difficult because we didn't have the video prompts, and the chair found it hard to give different people the floor. A few people had specific points they wanted to raise and slides that went with it, but they couldn't switch their laptops to show their slides. So there was a lot of downtime between handoffs due to the technology, and that meant that lots of us, including me, disengaged. You know, there wasn't really clear objectives for the meeting, and I came out of it wondering why I'd been there, to be honest, and I didn't get anything out of it, which is a shame because it looked like the chair had tried to put lots of effort into it, and it just didn't pay off.
Mm. And now, of course, let's go the other way. Please tell me about the best meeting you've ever attended.
Well, it'd be nice to say it was one of mine, but no, I don't think that's true. One of my colleagues is excellent at chairing meetings, and I've seen her run a meeting with about 30 people in the room, everyone paying attention all the way through, good turn taking, everybody got the chance to speak, started and finished on time, which I think is really important. And I think the best explanation of why it was a good meeting is there was a really clear reason for having the meeting. We were discussing a particular project, and we all came away feeling like something had changed. So the project had moved on in the space of an hour and a half. And that was due to the way that she handled the room.
All right. Let's turn our attention to the main topic, which is meeting management techniques. What exactly do we mean by meeting management techniques in the first place?
I think for me, meeting management techniques are what you do in the actual meeting to manage the discussion and to get to an outcome. So how do you manage the flow of the conversation? How do you manage the people? And how do you manage the processes around the meeting to achieve your objective, to get what you want at the end?
So when we say management, that's before, during, and after, right? That's not just as we are in the room.
I think most people would consider the bit that when you're in the room is probably the most important, but actually there's really a lot of stuff that happens before and afterwards that goes along. You know, the whole process of having a meeting starts way before you sit down around the table. So I think we need to look at the whole piece. And that there is a lot that goes on in the room as well, but to manage the meeting effectively, I think it starts before and it finishes after the part where you're all together. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. And I specifically asked about what management techniques, what we mean by that, because when I searched for the term meeting management techniques on the internet, almost all results that I find, they are less about management and techniques, and they're more about best practices in terms of what you need to do in order to make a meeting a success. Is that what it's all about?
I think there's a lot of similarities. Best practices for meetings and good meeting management techniques would be very similar, if not the same. I mean, for me, best practices is a team that seems very broad. It's something that we might use to describe a whole range of things, whereas meeting management techniques I think relates more specifically to the people and processes, but you could probably use them interchangeably.
And aren't these techniques something that everyone already knows about?
Well, how many poorly managed meetings have you been to?
Yeah, all right.
I mean, already this week I've been to one that didn't have an agenda and another where I've got no expectation of anything being documented as a result. So I'd like to think so. I think a lot of best practices and how we run meetings is common sense. But actually, there's a lot of meetings that I attend, and I'm sure listeners will as well, where people don't follow the best practice points. So I think that points to the fact that people don't know them or they choose to ignore them.
I have gathered a number of best practices in regards to meeting management techniques as we prepared our interview today. And what we'd like to do now is I'd like to go through these with you, and I'd like to hear your input for them. And of course, the first one is you have to develop a meeting objective. What do you have for us here on the objective side?
I think it is really important that you have an objective, because you have to know that you are leaving the meeting and that something is different on your project. And even if that's just that you've updated everyone, something has to be different for people who are leaving. And I think it's easier to develop your meeting objective when you know what sort of meeting you're going to have. And there's 5 meetings that I use on my projects that I consider to be the 5 standard types of meetings that everyone probably has. So at a status meeting, that's about feeding back, sharing information, or gathering information for formal management reports. So just updating everyone on status. In a planning meeting, your objective would be different, because it would be about looking forward. So you might do some brainstorming, you might mind map things, you'll work out strategies for making sure all the work gets done. And your objective there would be much more around how do we actually take this project on, and the practicalities of the tasks that need to be done. Most of what meetings in the middle of a project, I think they fall into sort of the category of working sessions. So you'll come together with a few colleagues, however many you need, and you'll work on a common project or a common problem or a task together, reviewing a document or brainstorming how you're going to solve a particular issue, dealing with risk planning, something like that. And the objective for that will be to move actively to this particular task or activity on, come to a decision about something, that kind of thing. I also use retrospective meetings, so lessons learned, looking backwards at what's happened. The objective for that would be to look at, not only to gather the lessons learned particularly, but also to look at how we would apply that learning to future projects or to future phases of this project. And then that gives us 4. I think the final type of meeting is the one that we shouldn't have had in the first place. That happens a lot, but it's when you're trying to get your work done as a team, and actually you'd be better off just cancelling it or not having that meeting at all. So if you've got one of those types of meetings coming up in your diary, your objective should be just take it out of the diary, cancel it, and free up the people to do the work.
All right. Second best practice that everybody always talks about is you have to develop the agenda for your meeting.
Yes, I think it's something that a lot of project managers struggle with, because it's one of the most popular search terms on my blog, people looking for agenda templates.
Really? Interesting.
The tip I have for you is to standardize your agendas as much as possible, and then you'll only have to change a few items every time you have the meeting. So a lot of what we do on projects is repetitive, in that you'll have steering group meetings or project board meetings, you'll have peer reviews or audits, or just general team meetings. So you can have one agenda that takes you through the whole project, and you only have to update 1 or 2 lines depending on what's important that week. I think another tip with agendas is to ask people to contribute their topic suggestions in advance. I do that particularly with larger meetings or with the project steering groups, because I think it helps the discussion stay on track, and it means people aren't bringing up huge topics as part of any other business at the end of the meeting.
Another big one is that you have to send the agenda ahead of time.
Yes, and as project managers, we shouldn't have any trouble with that.
Proactive.
Exactly. Send it a few days beforehand. I think if you send it any earlier, they will forget to bring it with them, or they'll forget they've had it. But it is good because it gives people the opportunity to prepare.
An interesting best practice that I have found is that we should tailor the meeting to our culture.
Yes. And I think that's hard for me to give specific tips on, because obviously it depends on what your project and office culture is. But I think you can adapt it to depend on your project culture. For example, in an agile environment, you're going to use stand-up meetings. In a formal waterfall project, you'll need formal end-of-phase review meetings. So you want to make sure that the type of meeting that you're having is suitable for the environment that you're working in.
Mm-hmm. Next, what I found is it says that we have to invite the right people. My question for you here is this. How do I identify the right people? How do I know that they are the right persons?
Great question.
Yeah.
It goes back to your objectives. So what are you hoping the outcome of the meeting will be? And then you can look at who is going to help you achieve that. Because the more people you have in a meeting, the harder it is to keep the discussion on track and to keep everybody engaged. So it's best to only invite the people that you need. And if that means that you can uninvite people, then great. I don't know anyone who would say, oh, I really want to spend my day in a meeting. I'm so disappointed that I can't be there. So don't feel bad about taking people off the invite list if you don't need them. But you need to understand what it is you're trying to achieve, so that if you need a decision made and finance play a big part in that decision, then obviously somebody from finance needs to be there. So it just comes down to your pre-meeting planning, working out what sort of topics are going to be discussed, which again is why having an agenda really helps.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I have identified that Elizabeth Harrin is the right person to attend my meeting. But unfortunately, Elizabeth is not available. What do I do now?
Well, if it has to be that particular person and you cannot have the meeting without them, then you have to change the time or change the arrangement so that they can perhaps dial in if they're not available to attend in person. But in reality, what works more often is that they can nominate a delegate who can cover the items on the agenda that relate to their area. As long as you make sure that the delegate, whoever is coming on their behalf, is fully briefed. And the most important thing is that they have responsibility to commit to decisions. Because what is really unhelpful is where somebody comes along as a stand-in and sits there, writes everything down, and then says, oh, well, I'll have to go back and ask whoever they're standing in for.
Yeah.
Then you feel like you've wasted the time and that you haven't managed to move the work on.
And now that I know who the right person is or the right persons are, and I made sure that everybody is available, I also have to make sure that they actually attend. How do I get them to attend?
Well, hopefully they understand why your meeting is important and what value it's going to add them to be there. So if there's stakeholders in the meeting, it's part of your stakeholder engagement to talk to them about why their attendance is required. A good technique is just to assume that they are coming. I don't mean don't send them any information. I mean, when you're talking to them about it, don't give them the option to not come. So you're presenting it as, when you come to this meeting, we will be discussing, not if you are available to come to this meeting, we will discuss. But the easiest thing to do is just to call them beforehand, the day before, and check that they're coming, because people forget. And also to make sure that all the details that they need for the location are on the agenda or in the invite, because people will sometimes forget that, or they won't be able to make it because they hadn't realised that you were meeting at a different location and they didn't get there and they came to the wrong room, and then they're late and then there's no point in them being there at all. Make it easy for them to come.
The next best practice that I found ties back nicely to the second question I asked you, the best meeting you had ever attended, because you said we started on time and we ended the meeting on time. And that's the best practice. Start and end the meeting on time, right? Your own experience says that's a good thing.
Yes, definitely. I probably don't need to add more to it than that, really. I think start at the time that you think is the right time and others join as they arrive. And next time, hopefully, they'll get the message that you won't hang around. I think it's disrespectful of everyone's time if you hang on and hang on and hang on. And it also means that as a project manager, you can't be late to your own meetings. That would be very bad practice.
Right. I recently spoke to Neil Whitten at the PMI Global Congress, and he said that he always makes sure that his meetings start late.
Really?
So meaning not at 10 o'clock, but at 10 minutes past 10, and that they end early, not at 11 o'clock, but at 10:50, so that people who are attending multiple meetings, their meeting ends at 10, and then they have 10 minutes to go to the restroom, walk to his meeting, and be there on time. And he sends them away early so that they are able to attend the next meeting again on time. So that's a little trick.
Yes.
That
he's
using.
He doesn't start them late. He schedules them to start at 10 past 10.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yes. It's not like that he schedules it for 10 and starts it at 10 after. No, he says the meeting begins at 10 after.
Yes.
Right. So yes, he schedules it, not at the top of the hour.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Next best practice, manage conflict during the meeting. It's nice as a best practice, but very hard to do.
It is, and you have to say normally about opposing viewpoints.
Yeah.
So, discussion is healthy. We know that happens on projects. We know people need to get out all of their thoughts and ideas when you're trying to work towards a common solution. So part of me thinks you just have to let it happen. But on the other hand, you have to be really alert when you're chairing a meeting and recognise when it's taking over. And then you have to step in and say, actually, that topic needs to be taken offline. And we have to write down and document in the minutes that the discussion is not finished and make sure that it's picked up again outside of the current meeting, because otherwise that conflict will just fester.
Yeah, taking it offline is actually my personal favorite way of approaching that, because if you just let it go on, you can really tell how this conflict starts sucking out the energy out of everybody in the room, and the room becomes somewhat dark and gloomy and uncomfortable and awkward, and people start shuffling. It's just a nice thing to happen. No. So taking it offline and giving everybody a moment to breathe, that's a good way of doing it. And
you can start off as you mean to go on by encouraging the group to listen to each other. And your written or unwritten ground rule is that you don't speak over each other, and you can step in if that happens. So if you're starting with sort of good turn-taking, professional approach, nice behaviour to each other in the room, hopefully you won't get into... You still might have a robust discussion that you need to pick up again later, but hopefully it won't be conflicting and then awkward.
Another best practice is that you should be taking notes, but preferably not yourself. Assign a note taker.
Yes, it is very hard if you are the chair of the meeting to make notes as well at the same time. And I think it works best because unless you happen to have a project coordinator or an admin assistant who's allocated to your project who can take on that role, rotate it round the team and give everybody the chance to do it, and just set that as the culture of the team, because otherwise someone will get lumbered with taking the notes every time, and it's not the most glamorous or interesting of jobs.
We used to have a management team meeting at my previous job, and that's exactly what we did. We rotated the note-taking and writing of the minutes around, which of course has its pros and its cons. The pro is that it's not the same person every time,
yes.
But the con is it's not the best person every time either. So you sometimes get really good and well-formulated meeting minutes, but then next week you don't know what you're going to get. So there's pros and cons to that approach as well.
I do tend to do more. Well, what I do in that situation is they send them to me first, and then I can standardise and add my interpretation, and then issue it to everyone. So it still gets issued from the project manager, even if the actual work was done by somebody else. But it's however you want the process to work. And if you are an amazing shorthand taker and feel that you can take notes at the same time, and in a very informal meeting that might work,
yes,
then you can do it. But there are some meetings where there's so much discussion, you're getting into technical solutions, you just can't keep on top of it and try and facilitate the room as well.
And at the same time as you're taking notes, you should also document action items and assign responsible parties to them.
Yes, you should.
How do you get the parties to commit during the meeting? Is there something special that you do, or?
Forcing them to say out loud that they commit is a good thing.
Right.
And getting them to set their own dates is also a good thing. Rather than say, you'll do that by Tuesday, get them to say, I can have that done by Friday, and document it. To be honest, though, even if they do commit verbally in a meeting and you follow it up in writing in the minutes, you still have to do lots of follow-up to make sure they do their work. Because
right. Who does the follow-up, actually? Because now we have already multiple people in the room. The regular attendees, you have the note-taker, you have yourself as the project manager and leader. Who follows up with the responsible parties, making sure that they are doing it? Who do you assign?
I think that's the work of the project manager.
Okay.
If it's a big project with workstream leaders and the project manager is really liaising with workstream leaders who are then liaising with the people who are doing the tasks, you might allocate that work to one of them if it's related to the piece of work they're responsible for, the work package that they're responsible for. But as a project manager, I suppose I'm a bit of a control freak, really. I just want to know that it's done. And I transfer all the actions from the minutes of any meeting get transferred onto one big action log. So I don't have to carry around 15 sets of minutes from lots of different meetings. I just have one long list of everything that anybody committed to do ever. And whenever I see them, or during the team meetings, I can filter it by their name and then just go down and say, have you done it? Have you done it? Have you done it? People will do their work if they're nagged. Some people will do it just because they understand the value of the project and they're keen and enthusiastic. Other times it involves a lot of chasing.
Mm-hmm. One thing that we used to do with the action items and the responsible parties is we included the list always in the minutes, but it was a working list. So this week's minutes would contain the table with all the action items, which would then be included as part of the invitation for the next meeting. So you would see the action items that we agreed upon last time in the invitation. And that table would once again go into the minutes of the next meeting, taking out what had been done. So it was always in front of you. You had it in the agenda, in the invitation, you had it in the meeting minutes, and you could see it, how it was a working document.
Yes, I think that
just
works well.
kept it was alive. Yeah.
We do the same with the table of actions updated with the ones that are closed dropped off, and I include it at the bottom of the agenda because that's the document that people I think are more likely to bring to the meeting. But including it in the invite itself would be great too. That still only gives you the view of that particular series of meetings. So they might be the meeting minutes for your project boards or the meeting minutes for your team meetings. But anything that's slightly ad hoc needs to be followed up separately.
Right.
Or carried forward.
Absolutely.
Maybe you just include them in your table. I mean, however you do it, just sometimes there's meetings or actions agreed outside of your normal forum. And you don't want to lose sight of those ones either.
Yeah, nowadays I would probably not do it in that fashion anymore, just carrying it over and over and over weeks. I would probably have some kind of a shared document somewhere in the cloud where, we link to from each of these documents saying, this is where our action items can be found. Last but not least here on the list of the best practices for meeting management, ensure that the minutes are actually written and sent out.
Yes, it's easy to forget that bit, isn't it?
Yes.
Within a week, I'd say, preferably sooner. And on meetings where you discussed and agreed lots of things, you'll want to give others the opportunity to comment on the draft minutes and add their recollections, especially if there were some sensitive things discussed or where the solution was very complicated. I will do that. I'll issue it to one or two people or the people who I think have the most interest in the content or said the most things in the meeting. I just want to make sure that I've reflected their comments accurately. They get the chance to review the minutes and make sure that I recorded it as it should be. In other meetings where it's less sensitive content or where it's just easier to manage, I issue the final version directly.
All right, so these were the best practices, and the ones that we have just reviewed, they're going to be helpful in making almost any meeting a success. But we cannot forget that we also have online meetings, virtual meetings, where people are not in the same room. And I'd like to hear your thoughts of what we need to take into account in those cases. So what are some considerations for any type of virtual meetings in general?
Firstly, try to create a level playing field. So when virtual meetings tend to work well is where everybody is in a similar situation. So you don't have 90% of your team all in one room and then one person dialing in, because you'll find that you forget about that one person and have side conversations that they can't hear. So if that's likely to happen, just get everybody to dial in. And so your level playing field means that everybody has the same experience and everybody is much more focused on the type of virtual meeting that it is. I think that really helps. I'd also recommend that you test the technology regularly because...
As we have learned from your initial answer, yes.
If you're using whatever web conferencing software that you're using, or if you're planning on sharing your screen or doing anything like that, make sure you know how it works and make sure everybody else knows how it works. I've been on several WebEx conferences where the software itself tries to install and download something on the attendee's computer. And if
Adobe Acrobat always shows up and says, update is ready, please install. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Not everyone, especially in a corporate environment where your desktops are really locked down, not everyone is going to be able to download things off the internet and install applications on their computer. So it's a good idea to do a trial run the day before, just to make sure that, everybody can log in. Even if you do that with each person individually. I was on something recently where the process flow of the WebEx, or it wasn't WebEx, but the process flow of the online conferencing tool said, now enter your meeting PIN. And we didn't have one. And we were going back through the instructions, back through the emails that we'd been sent, and it just turned out that we could just click OK. But, we were struggling through the process because we didn't really know what we were doing. And the instructions weren't that helpful. So even if that just takes up half an hour of your day the day before, it will save you loads of time and lots of goodwill as well. People like to be able to just dial in and get started. It's a waste of time to have people who have made it work hanging on while you try and sort out the person who can't see the screen.
What do you do if somebody calls in from a car?
That is tricky, isn't it? Because really, it's only really suitable for conversations where they need to listen in, because they're driving. They should be wary of their safety, and you shouldn't expect them to lead a discussion or use their brain too much when their focus really needs to be on keeping safe on the road. And they won't have access to their notes. They won't be able to take any notes. So if they do say, oh, yes, I'll do that, then you'll have to remind them of any actions they agree to.
They'll forget,
It's much better if they can pull over, I think, especially with Signal, because you should expect them to drop in and out as they're driving. They'll go through areas where they just don't get any reception. There's also quite a lot of background noise, isn't there, when you're in a car? So going on mute is a good thing if they are going to be listening in.
Right. I recently was participating in our daily stand-up meeting. We have one at 9 o'clock every day, as I was just coming out of a doctor's visits office, and I was in the parking lot in my car, and I was listening in. I was on mute, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this is so boring. It wasn't for me that day. So I decided, okay, I'll start driving, right? And so I started driving, and suddenly I was several kilometers away from where I had started without even realizing it, because my mind was listening to the conversation that was coming in over the phone, and my body was just on autopilot driving. Luckily, I had driven this route several times, so my body knew what it was doing, but still, I suddenly was somewhere totally different without even noticing that I had driven all this way. So very dangerous for the person who's participating in the car. Yeah.
Yes, and you might find, and it's happened to me when I've been listening to the radio, not when I've been on conference calls, you get so engrossed in what you're listening to, or an audiobook or something. I drive the default route, which is normally going home. And that might not be where I'm actually supposed to be going. And you'll find yourself just following, you kick into autopilot, and you drive carefully and safely to where your body takes you, and that might not actually be your proper location. So yes, I would prefer that people, if you've got any choice, don't try and have important meetings with people in the car. It's just not practical.
Right. Definitely you can't have a video conference from your car. So what specific considerations do we need to keep in mind for video conferences here? Like Skype, Google Hangouts, WebEx, or other similar online tools?
Well, I think with everything that where you have people from different locations, you need to check your time zones, because you need to make sure that people are dialing in at a time that's practical for them, and you haven't created the meeting at 11 o'clock at night or something. But specifically about video conferencing, where you're other online tools where you're sharing screens, is you'll want to check your settings so that you don't accidentally share anything that you don't want attendees to see. So, you could flick between screens and have your email inbox open, for example. And I've been in meetings where that's happened. And I thought, this is interesting. I can have a good old read through what emails these persons got in. That might not be appropriate. And pop-ups as well. Skype has an annoying habit of popping up who's online. And you might also get emails coming up, and you'll see the first line of what the email's about, which may be okay if it's professional. But if you're getting personal emails or just general chit-chat, you might not want those to be showing. And it's just distracting for other people. So if you're sharing your screen, just be careful about what is going to be shared. And if you're on video conference, remember that people can see you. People will be able to tell if you aren't concentrating because they'll see you working on something else. So
right.
In a way, it's a good thing.
This is actually the reason why we chose to start using video during our daily stand-up. So there are 4 of us meeting every day, and we used to do it audio only. And then Jonathan and I, we attended a PMI dinner meeting, a conference, where the speaker talked about exactly that situation where, when you have audio only, people tend to tune out and not participate. And so we decided the next day, we're all going to start using video. And it has completely changed the feeling that we have during our meeting because everybody is paying attention for the whole 15, 20 minutes. You notice that they're looking in the camera, they're actively participating. It's become a much more productive meeting that way. And I'm looking at the camera now as I'm speaking to you, even though you're not on camera. Yes. Do you have any considerations for us if we're just talking teleconference where you only get the voice, dial-in phone conference lines, things like that?
Well, it's similar to the video, actually, because I've got conflicting views about going on mute. And if you are on mute and you're the organizer or the note taker, you can do other things like typing up the call notes as you go. But if you stay off mute, you're more inclined to participate and not multitask because you know that people will be able to hear your keys tapping in the background. So I think people need to make their own judgment on that, and it might be different for different meetings. And from my personal perspective, I am on mute more often than I am not because there's background noise where I work. And even if I'm participating fully, it's still distracting for everybody else.
Right. My colleague Jean Dutz has this story about mute. It was a teleconference with just telephones that they were doing, conference rooms connecting in. And at some point, the leading team said, "Excuse us, please," and they went on mute.
To have a private conversation.
They had a private conversation. They went on mute during the meeting. Nobody else could hear them. They discussed what they wanted to discuss about the topic at hand for a full 2 minutes. He said it was just quiet. Then they came back on again and said, "Okay, we've made a decision here at our end. We'll let you know," and moved the meeting on. Can you imagine what a downer this is for everybody else who's there? It's like a slap in the face.
We don't care about your opinion. We're not even going to tell you what the decision is.
Yes.
Yes, then that's not good meeting practice, really, is it?
No.
And that's a good example of a meeting where you've got lots of different groups. And I'd say another tip for when you can only hear the voice is to introduce yourself when you speak. Because especially at the beginning of projects or in big teams, less relevant as the team spends more time together or in very small teams. But we used to do that. I'd say, "Hello, it's Elizabeth here. I've got a point about blah, blah, blah." Or just so that people will know who's speaking. You shouldn't assume that everyone on the call will just recognize your voice.
All right. So we've had video conferences, audio conferences, online meetings. Are there any other kinds of virtual meetings?
It's not really a proper virtual meeting, but an online discussion between 2 or more people where you're using instant messaging, so text chat.
Oh, like a chatting, yes.
You could still make decisions in that forum. You could still have actions as a result of that informal text chat. So it's, I suppose it's a kind of virtual meeting. Yeah.
I used to volunteer for PMI's social media advisory group. We used WhatsApp to chat. Yeah, so we had everybody on the group was in WhatsApp, and we used that as a chat medium, and it was basically an always-on conversation. So every day, 1 or more people were talking on that conversation, and it kept everybody constantly in the loop about what's going on. Of course, it's completely, not formal, and anything that you really wanted to make decisions about, you would take online or have a one-on-one conversation with the person. But yes, I agree. Chatting and having these kind of conversations is a type of virtual meeting, even if it's just informal. Now, come to think of it, following through with everything that we have talked about, sending out the agenda, creating an objective, talking to people beforehand, taking notes, sending it out, making sure people are following up. This takes work.
Yes.
it means there's a cost associated with it. And that cost, that comes out of our project budget. Is the cost that we are generating really worth the result?
Outside of the software to facilitate your meetings, then the cost is really your time. It's the people cost. Mm-hmm. But I think it's worth it. Because if you don't have, look at what you are saving. If you don't have good meetings management techniques, you'll find people don't engage with your project seriously, they don't complete their actions, they won't turn up on time, and you will waste time. And if you want them to respect your time, you need to set the standard. I think it's about setting a professional working discipline for your project and knowing that it will save you time later on because you'll have these decisions documented, because people will come to the meetings prepared because they saw an agenda, and hopefully you will reap that time back through greater efficiency. It's not really something that we track, right. So you'll have to take a feel for how efficient you're becoming because of having to do this extra work around planning your meetings. But my experience is that it does pay off.
Also, if you think of this bigger than your own project, if you have going on people who attend your 45-minute meeting that was well organized, planned with everything, and you can go through it bang, bang, bang and have everything cleared up, versus having these 7 people be attending a 90-minute meeting that is disorganized and causes a lot of back and forth and nobody knows what's going on and follow-ups and all that, you have just saved 7 times 45 minutes of company time. Yes. That may not sound like much, but imagine if every project meeting were saving 45 minutes of people's time. Yes. The amount of saved cost is horrendous.
Yes, and I think that I've heard of people, I've never done it myself, but I've heard of people who work out the salary cost on average of the time wasted in the meeting. And at the end of the meeting, say, because of this meeting has cost us X thousand pounds, whatever. I think that's quite a harsh approach, but it's if you really need to shake up your team, maybe that's something to consider.
Right. Everything we talked about so far, it seems like it is common sense. It's obvious that the right people should attend, that we should have a goal, send out an agenda, start on time, follow up, make sure the technology is appropriate and so on. So why is it that ever so often we ignore it and feel that we can just skip a step or 2 here, or even all of them?
Because we don't have much time in the day, because it feels administrative and therefore not important. And also, I think, because project managers often assume that other people give our projects the same level of importance as we do. And because of that, you assume people will remember what they've signed up to do and their tasks, and they'll follow up on them because it's important to them. But really, they go back to their day jobs, and your project may be at the forefront of your mind and what you spend 8 hours a day working on, but it's unlikely to be their sole focus. So, it slips down the priority list, and unless you've got that formal structure in place and you're using your management techniques, the tasks will fall through the cracks. And also because, as I mentioned earlier, typing up minutes is boring. Or I'm sure some people find it really, I'm sure some people are really good at it and find it a really useful and pleasant experience. But when I talk to project managers, the admin side is the bit that they like the least.
Right. What do you personally do about this almost, I don't know, laziness, complacentness, just, knowing that we should be doing it, but we're not? What do you do about it? How do you get over it and say, okay, I have to do this?
It's changing an attitude, really. So I personally have to acknowledge these people who are coming to my meetings are not project managers. They're not experts at scheduling tasks, and therefore they might not be that great at managing their own personal work lists either. So they've all got other things to do in a day that are competing for their time. If I want a meeting to have a positive outcome, I have to do the work. And that means preparing myself and preparing other people. Sometimes I'll talk to people in advance of a meeting to make sure that I know what they want to bring up and I can make sure it's properly discussed in the time. And following up afterwards and being the person who sees things through. Because I think there's a certain amount of having to do some of the thinking for other people, because when their lives get busy and other things take priority, they need you to remind them. It's just accepting that's part of the job.
What I tend to do is something very simple. And I started doing that in the past when I was still working as an active project manager for my previous job, where I had projects that were very short, 2 months, 3 months long projects. And so I would need to, get started with a new project pretty quickly after a couple of months. And, you've done this so often that I don't need to look into the methodology. I know exactly what I'm doing. I've started 20 projects in the last 2 years. That's when you start making mistakes. Mm-hmm. So what I tended to do there is I tended to go back and look at the methodology briefly. Yes, I've done this 25 times already, but what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? And I've taken that approach and I've pretty much rolled that out across the board. Every time that I'm supposed to do something, and in this particular case, invite and prepare a meeting, I would go online and I would Google tips to make a meeting successful, or top 10 meeting management techniques, or something along those lines. That would remind me of the basics. Yes, I've done this so many times that I should know it, but we tend to forget. We tend to get lazy or just skip a step or two. So I've sort of cheated myself into this and used this little trick of spending a minute or two just going online and looking up, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing here in order to do it right?
That's really good advice. I have something similar. I have for meetings, I have 2 checklists, a pre-meeting checklist and a post-meeting checklist. And it just lists everything that I'm supposed to do before a meeting and then everything I'm supposed to do after a meeting.
After the meeting, yeah.
It takes away the chance that you're going to forget something. And it just standardizes everything. You work through a list, you tick, tick, tick. It means you don't have to, you're working through a standard approach, and that makes it easy. And I use standard agendas as much as possible and standard minutes template as well. So trying not to create things from scratch every time.
Yeah, a perfect segue into my next question, because let's assume that we followed all our suggestions and the meeting starts shortly, say maybe in an hour or 2 hours. What should our personal preparation look like during the moments leading up to a meeting?
Well, in the moments leading up to a meeting, hopefully I'm quite calm because I will have already printed the agenda and the minutes from last time. And I'll do that. I'll do it the day before because I've been caught out too many times where I've tried to do it in the morning and the printer's broken or my laptop won't boot up or something. So I like to have them ready the day before. And I also don't like to rely on having my laptop in a meeting. I prefer to not have the screen in front of me and to be able to engage with the people who are there. And if I'm moving to a meeting room for the meeting and carrying my laptop with me, it's a little bit temperamental. So I'm a big fan of paper, and I know that's not going to suit everybody, but that's what I would do. I would go to the room early, and I'd make sure if I was taking my laptop that it was connected up to power and connected up to the screen if I needed to show any slides. I would also already have a cup of tea, because unless you've done what your colleague did earlier on and build time in at the beginning for people to get tea or to get refreshments, I think my meeting should start on time, which means I'm coming to my meeting ready to start, not needing then to, I'll just put my stuff down and then I'll go to the kettle and do that. So in my lead up to the meeting, I'll be reminding myself of the objective. I'll be making sure I remember who's coming and who sent apologies so that we don't hang around waiting for someone who's not going to show up, and just compose myself to be all organised, really.
Here's my final question for you. Out of everything that we have heard, what's your shortlist? Which meeting management techniques do you recommend to us project managers to be used on all project meetings in order to make them not only more successful, but also make them a pleasure to attend?
Well, it's quite hard to narrow them down, isn't it? But I think my top 5 would be have an agenda. If you don't do full minutes, at least record the actions. So that's 2. Follow up. That's quite a broad topic, but however it looks like to you, follow up your meetings afterwards. Number 4 would be you finish the meeting by confirming the date and time of the next meeting. It's very easy to forget, but it saves so much time trying to schedule the next get-together if everyone is there and everyone has their diaries with them. And finally, number 5, I'd say bring cake.
Excellent. Elizabeth, thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you.